This one is for the folks with the very specific use case. This is the SilverStone Grandia 11, a stereo-shaped type of case primarily meant to be installed next to a TV. This type of HTPC or home theater PC case has its use cases. You can use it for some TV screen gaming, after all these couch like mouse and keyboard combos do exist, or you can use it with a controller. Or just to watch some movies. I mean, you do you, and if I had known how crappy that touchscreen Apple TV remote is, I would have just built a PC. Whatever your reason is to be interested in a PC of this shape, having that shape comes with its own set of quirks and restrictions, so let's have a look at that. Standing on the desk, the Grandia is 440mm wide, 400mm deep and 176mm high. And for once, these dimensions are like really important. I mean, just imagine having like a TV cabinet that is 30 centimeters deep and then half of your case is just like dangling down in the front. No. Anyway, despite it looking kinda big, it is actually just 30.9 liters, which is a rather small case. It is standing on 4 round and not really that high feet with some rubber underneath, though the height is really not important here because there is no air going in from the bottom, so the feet are just there to like not scratch anything, but I mean, they could have been lower at this point. To open the case, we got 2 thumb screws in the back, and then we can just unhook the top panel, much like the average metal side panel of a regular case, just like a lot easier because the weight helps to keep everything in place and like slide in the little hooks to close it down. On the inside we can't really see that much, but once we remove this hard drive / rail system thingy, we can see what's up here. Inside the Grandia we can fit the usual motherboard sizes. Everything from mini ITX all the way up to regular ATX, but apparently SSI CEB boards can fit as well. You know, in case you want to build a stereo-shaped server for whatever reason, and just keep in mind that at some point you are going to struggle with the front cooling. Anyway, as you can see, once the hard drive / rail thing is out, this thing is just an empty box, much like very old computers. And the power supply, for example, goes in the top right corner, just like with old PC cases. Officially, there is no restriction for that, or technically you could also install like up to 360mm long PSUs if you find such a behemoth to, you know, just span the whole thing until you start hitting the front panel. But I would try to stay somewhere underneath 160, 165, 170mm because otherwise you will start taking away that fan spot in front of it. For air cooler, we are quite limited here. With up to 146mm high towers, we are looking at top-down blowers or very small tower coolers or just AIOs, but we will get to that later. But these limitations do not apply to the GPU. Here we got the full span of the case to work with in one direction, and that is still with an asterisk. Technically, the GPU can be up to 340mm long, but that is only the case for the theoretical second PCIe slot. Here it might be important to add, for most motherboards out there, like right now, that first PCIe slot location isn't used at all. I got like maybe 1 or 2 boards where the physical location of the first X16 slot, the main X16 slot, if you want to call it that, is actually on the PCIe location one. And if you're unsure if you've got one of these magical boards, just check if there is a shorter slot above the first X16 slot, or if there is a NVMe slot there. If that is the case, usually the first slot is not existent, and then everything is pushed down to the second one and you're good. And don't forget that the board is glued to the case at the bottom, so forget about installing a triple slot card at the very bottom. But the main asterisk about GPUs inside the Grandia is, in my opinion, the height. Officially you can install up to 151mm thick cards, so like high cards. Deep cards. But that's also completely ignoring all power cables. The card that I installed in here for the last build was the Gainward Phantom 4080, and that one is already 142mm thick. It's a behemoth, and add to that the PSU native NVIDIA plug and you are looking at a severe cable band, one that I am absolutely not comfortable on a long-term usage base. So if you're going with the case, maybe look for cords that aren't as bulky as mine, and maybe, or please, get a 90-degree adapter just to be safe. On a brighter note, we got some I/O. In the bottom of the front panel, we will find a bunch of stuff like a power and reset switch on one side, as well as a combined audio in and out, USB 3.2 Type-C and two USB 3.0 Type-A ports. And because we are in the home theater PC world, we got a little toggle which we can use to hide the power and drive LEDs, which won't hide the white LED which is still shining in the background. Okay. And this bulge, which is a discussion for later. Before we get to the complicated part of this case, let's bring back the drive/rail thing. Using this cage, we can install up to two 3.5-inch drives, and then we install the whole thing back inside. Oh, and by the way, if you only want to use the rail for some like extra case strength, if you really want that, like for example, if you want to put a monitor on top, use that one rail just to give it like more strength. You can do that. You don't need to keep the drive cage in there. You can remove only that and keep the rail. And then for extra storage, we got another cage included in the box of goodies, where you will also find all of the mounting screws for the case. This one mounts right behind the power supply, and it can keep either a 3.5 or 2.5-inch drive. So drive-wise, the case is good and not good. You got up to 3.5-inch drives, which is kind of impressive, for nowadays at least. Or you got like one 2.5-inch drive, which is like really not impressive. Not at all, but I mean, let's be honest, for a 2.5-inch SSD, you can just connect them and then just stash them somewhere and it's going to be fine, but I never said that. And now let's get to the complicated stuff, and the SilverStone decision I just can't wrap my head around. What's up with the cooling? There are 7 fan spots inside the Grandia 11, 2 of which are inside the front panel. You can take a look at this magical decision by unhooking the front panel in the top and then pulling it towards the bottom and then away. Yeah, the 2 pre-installed front fans. No idea why there isn't a third one. Like, there are 2. These 2 pre-installed 120mm fans are installed on a kind of fan bracket which protrudes a bit outside of the case, and it just doesn't span the whole case. Like, there is space for a third fan. Why is there no third fan? It's just beyond me who thought this was a smart move. Anyway, they are 3-pin voltage controllable. They aren't particularly loud, but I would change them if I had the budget, especially because once you get into the radiator situation with this, you really want to change them, but they will do for the basic build, but that's like the first thing you want to upgrade. Anyway, there are 2 more spots. One is immediately behind the power supply, also a 120mm fan. Out of the box, it comes blocked off by this plastic piece, but you can replace it with this very similar looking plastic piece found in a box of goodies, which got holes. Ooh, and a fabric dust filter. Ah. On the opposite side of the case, we got another 2 120mm spots, also closed off by a plastic piece, but this one is already open by default. And don't forget that any fan you install here will take away the space above the motherboard. So don't come with like 30mm thick air blasters and then expect to use the theoretically 7th PCIe slot. And don't forget, very important, don't forget to install all or connect all of the bottom motherboard connectors beforehand. Good luck getting any of them in once the fans are installed. And then we got these 2. These are 80mm fan spots. We used a pair of Arctic P8s, but there are plenty of alternatives out there. Some just might cost a fortune and others don't. For radiators, it's the front or nothing. Up to 2 40mm AIOs can be installed in the front. Technically, you could also install a rad below the GPU if you got enough space, but A, you will need a very, very thin GPU, and B, you will need a very short one because you somehow need to get the tubes to the back. So 240 in the front and that's it. So, cooling. Why is that front made for only 2 fans? It's just beyond me. Not only is it a completely lost opportunity, both to have some decent airflow throughout the case, and second, you just lose 360mm AIOs, because you could install them. Sure, it would be a shared space between the GPU and a potential 360, but people would have the option. In this case, people don't have the option. And don't get me even started on what happens if you install ARGB fans in the front. The color just randomly ends after like 2/3 of the case. Why? But the more complicated topic will be how to orient the fans. By default, the front is in, which kinda makes sense. And the side where the GPU is would also need to be in, otherwise you would just suffocate the poor thing. But what about the third fan and the back ones? Well, we did some benchmarks just to see what works best for this setup. This is a 5800X3D with that before mentioned 4080 and an iceberg thermal 240mm AIO using the original fans of the case. And for the rest of the case, I stuffed it with iceberg thermal iScale AI GB120s, except for the back two fans, those are Arctic P8s. Then to test all of this, I just left all the fans and the pump, for that matter, at max speed, and I recorded the average die temperature over time. And apart from different fan orientations, I also wanted to test the case or how it behaves if it was enclosed in a box which is closed from like every side except for the front. Basically, what I said in the build video, that some people have TV cabinets that are closed off from every side except for the front, and that would be like a box inside a box, and I would like to know for those people what's the best orientation. And I tried to recreate this using my magical carton box. The first recording is of what I would call the standard mode. Basically everything is pulling air in except for the back fans that are pulling air out. Much more air going in than out, and the few breathing holes on the top panel will also act like an exhaust thanks to all of that pressure. To my surprise, it wasn't really that good. Sure, not thermal throttling, not really, but not that good overall. And if we do the same thing in my carton cabinet simulator, we saw exactly what I expected. It took some time to equalize, but at some point there will be so much hot air inside the carton box that it will just be like sucked back in by the case fans, and at that point you are starting to create a hot box, and yeah, it ends up being a few degrees higher if you just wait long enough compared to the open air edition. But what if we reverse the airflow? Basically the P8s now act as intake, we just turn them around, and the two front fans are also turned around, and they are pushing the air out of the case towards the front, and also in that particular case out of that carton box. And to my surprise, that works significantly better than the standard approach, like significantly better. We saw that it's like 5 or 6 degrees below the other two options, a way better result. Here I also want to note that the air pressure inside the case has severely changed. Sure, it's still very positive, but not as much as the all-in approach with only the P8s pushing air out of the case. But now comes the point that I didn't expect. Despite the fact that we are now pushing hot air out in the front of the case, basically blasting it away as far as possible from that carton box around my box, the result still wasn't better. It's pretty much the same thing we had before. So yeah, no matter if I had the air go front to back or vice versa, having the case inside a 3 sides closed off cabinet adds a degree or two. And for those of you who wonder if there is just still way too much pressure inside of the case, because of that huge disparity between the front to back and back to front, I tried another approach. Front in, back out, like the standard approach, GPU fans in, and the one fan next to the PSU will be out. I know it doesn't make that much sense considering that we now got an exhaust fan right next to an intake fan, or the intake fan of the PSU. So at some point one is going to suck in the hot air from the other one, which doesn't make much sense. But this was by far the best run. So yeah, for my particular build, in this particular case, front to back and left to right was by far the best approach. But also take all of these results with a grain of salt. It's not a standardized test, it's just my one particular build with different fan orientations, and that's what I found. That said, I'm still not that happy with the case. No cable management whatsoever, except for a little space underneath the radiator location, which really isn't accessible once the rad is in. And the build quality. The front panel just feels plastic as hell. The locking mechanism is, it's so loose, it's barely hanging on. The glue that keeps this brushed aluminum finish tape on doesn't really do much. This bulge here is... This is not a feature. All the screws aren't catching. The plastic covers on the fans feel kinda cheap. Sure, you can screw them in using fan screws to keep them from rattling around, but I don't know. The mesh in the front doesn't look particularly good in person, and I will just never understand where that potential third fan went. I mean, don't get me wrong, the case isn't a failure, it's not bad, it did its job. Sure, there are big differences in performance once you get to the specifics, like fan orientations, but at the end of the day, every orientation kept my CPU from lighting itself on fire. I just think I expected something that feels way higher end. After all, once you get into the cinema, TV world's home cinema thing, everything becomes very, very high-end feeling very quickly. And I kind of expected the same thing from the Grandia. And yeah, it just didn't. It feels way more budgety if you ask me. And at 159 euros right here and now, I think I can expect something that feels way more premium than this. Or looks way more premium and doesn't do this, and there is not a fan missing, and I don't know. I mean, at this point I could also just get a light base 600, turn it around. It would be the same price. So yeah, if you're looking for a small HTPC case, sure, if you can fit all the hardware in it, just don't expect a premium thing. But okay, this should be everything on the Grandia 11 from SilverStone, and at this point a huge thank you to SilverStone for sending it over. Oh, on a side note, we have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And we got channel membership, so if you are planning to sell your soul for an OG poop emoji, that's one way to go. But if not, I'm also releasing the content to all members 2 or 3 weeks in advance, except for the NDA stuff, because you know I don't want to get sued. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to get a few sessions to recover from this. I will need them now. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at our take on the Lightbase 900. Yeah, I know, way bigger, but if you turn it around, it does kind of look like a home theater shaped case. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.